Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Mitko Karshovski. He's the host of the That Remote Life podcast and founder of Parable, an online community, and all around big advocate of location independence and digital nomad lifestyle. Mitko, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Your podcast has been around longer than mine. You're almost at 150 episodes, right?
Yeah, I think we're closing in on 150, which is kind of insane considering that I feel like episode 1 was like yesterday. So
One thing you got going for you is you got the mic, you know how to join on time. So it's good. I actually enjoy interviewing podcast hosts because I know they know how to give a good interview and I know their equipment is going to work.
yeah, right. And it's almost like we know how to have like a back and forth. Like usually my best episodes are with other people who have run podcasts or do YouTube channels or do something like that because they know how to do the back and forth. So
Yeah, man. So I was thinking for the audience, we could give a little bit of a background on your story, where you are from, how you became location independent, and how things have sort of grown in the 6+ years that you've been working online.
yeah, I mean, so there's quite a bit to cover there, but yeah, I was born in Varna, Bulgaria. If you can't tell from the awesome name, that's very different than most Americans. And I was born in Varna, and then when I was 11, my family and I immigrated to the United States, which was in like 2004 or something like that. And
Hmm.
I just grew up in the U.S., had the classic American childhood. Lived in the suburb, went to high school, got good grades. The plan was like get good grades in high school, go to a good college, get a job, like a respectable job, whatever. And when I went to school, I actually went to study biotechnology. And I remember the first day that I walked into this lab, I was like, oh no, like, what did I do? This is like, just something immediately felt off. And it's not like it was the subject because I'd actually been studying biotech for several years in high school. I was in like an advanced science program. But there was just something weird when I went to college to study it that didn't feel quite right. And as I went through that time, studying it in college, it kind of like intensified. Like I thought it would go away, but it didn't. It just got worse. And so finally, when I was a sophomore in college, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Something's weird. I don't like where I'm headed. It just something felt really off. And I knew that if I didn't do something dramatic, like I was headed down a path that was very easy to stay on, but where it ended up wasn't somewhere that I wanted to go. So I decided to
Hmm.
drop out of school and I got involved with startups. And through that process of like working with startups and kind of diving in more into the entrepreneurial world, because I had this idea that maybe that's why I enjoyed the biotech work that I was doing in high school, because the program that I was in was actually very entrepreneurial. Like you essentially was like a 2-year program where you created a project and you went and you pitched it and you did all this kind of stuff. Essentially, like doing a startup is kind of like what I realized it was.
Hmm.
And so, because of that, I got involved in the startup world. And then, just through working with people who were already on the forefront of like working online and working with software and all that other kind of stuff, I finally found this term digital nomad. And I read that term and it was like the Pandora's box. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want, because I'd always felt really weird growing up in Bulgaria and having this one part of my life be over there. And then it was almost like the page in a book turned and it was a new chapter. And they've always felt like two very separate parts of my life. And I just had never been able to imagine myself living in the United States and spending every day in the same city and making the same drive to the same job just felt so bizarre to me, knowing that there was this entire other world out there to explore. And so when I found out that there were people out there that were like doing business and making money and still being um, ambitious is a very strong word, but they weren't just like backpackers that were bumming around the world, which I think is fine if that's what you want to do, but that's not what I wanted to do. And when I found out there were people that were doing that, that were going out there, that were being ambitious, that were doing cool things and were building businesses, but still being able to travel and to explore the world, I was like,
Hmm.
boom, that's it. Like, that's what I want to do. And so, yeah, started working online when in 2016, I started dabbling. And then 2017, I went full remote.
And one thing I picked up on there is I think it's interesting how that you started working in the startup ecosystem and kind of through your exposure to startups and the tech Silicon Valley community, you kind of learned about being a digital nomad through Silicon Valley and that culture.
Yeah, so I didn't go to Silicon Valley. I thought about going to California, but actually, where I grew up in the US, in Cincinnati, it was a weird time because the tech scene was just starting to boom there. And there's a lot of this movement around like staying in the Midwest, keeping your costs low, and still
Right.
working on big ideas. So I didn't go to
Ramen
Silicon Valley.
profitability. No, but no,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I almost meant more like culturally. Like you're
yeah.
probably, familiar with Paul Graham early on and some of the famous like VCs at the time and checking in on things with Y Combinator or reading TechCrunch and things like that. And it was similar for me. I did work in Silicon Valley in venture capital, and so I was exposed to the idea of being a digital nomad, exposed to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and stuff early on. And I don't really like read TechCrunch, and I feel like I'm not as close to the latest trends in Silicon Valley as much anymore. But I'm almost wondering, like, I wonder what micro trends are popping up like right now that uh, I'm not hearing about because I'm not close enough to the ground.
Yeah, I think that they're. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I'm also not that connected with that world, and I was starting to say something, and then I thought about it, and I was like, what do I know? Because like I might think something, but in the people who are in that world that I'm connected with are
Uh huh.
probably just part of my echo chamber online. You know what I mean? To where I'm like, they're
Right.
all starting to think like us, but like maybe it's like the five people think like me who are in my like zone. So
Right, right. But long story short, we both found out about remote work and working online early on and decided that that was something that we wanted to do. Now, like you know a lot about the digital nomad ecosystem and probably where this whole thing is headed. Like you're probably, you know what I mean? I think about you. I think about maybe Peter Levels and a couple other people like the CEO of Selena or something that like really kind of know where the digital nomad stuff is headed. We can come back to that kind of later in the show. Kind of some because you've had actually a lot of on that remote life podcast. You've actually had a lot of really cool guests, like I think Nomad X, things like that, like co-living, things like that. Just like stuff that really is going to be increasingly big in the future. But I do want to come back to it just to, we'll kind of get to like the future type stuff later on. How long did it take between learning about the digital nomad lifestyle to kind of quitting your job and fully executing on it? And what were some of the I read that you've done a little bit of everything to make money online. So what was that like in the early days?
yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot less time, but when I was in the thick of it of trying to figure out, I remember it taking forever. I think it took me about maybe like a year and a half to maybe 2 years to really kind of become fully location dependent. The only reason why it took so long was because I kept trying to do more of like a startup thing, and like that
Mm,
was going to be my way of becoming location independent and not just starting to make money. Do you know what I mean? Like any way I could.
right.
So it was almost like this. I had this muscle that I kept trying to use, and it just wasn't the right muscle to use in that scenario. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I've tried, like you said, and thank you, by the way, for mentioning me along a lot of those names. I'm humbled to be mentioned as part of them. But yeah, I mean, I started out in e-commerce first, just because that was so big at the time. Well, first before that, I tried to do a whole bunch of stuff on my own. I actually tried to do like a double-sided marketplace, which is like the worst idea. It's like the hardest business model to have. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this one. And like everyone's like, no, you're an idiot. You shouldn't do that. In retrospect, they were correct. But yeah, so I did e-commerce. I tried doing drop shipping for a little while because that was so hot at the time. It was such an easy model to follow. Um, then I moved into really afterwards, I started working with Amazon FBA, an Amazon FBA business.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I got my Nomad wings, so to say, my location dependent wings. And then that business got sold. I was actually like working for the founders, and that business got sold. And then I took like the marketing skills that I learned in there. Started working at an agency with a buddy of mine. We were like running this like little mini super hustle agency, and then after that, I ended up working with another agency and then was freelancing a bunch of different skills. I mean, I've like sold a lot of different things and have sold my time for money in a lot of different fields as well, which while I was doing that was like the worst because everyone seemed like they had their thing and everyone was like an expert at this specific thing and they had this very specific skill, and I've
Mhm.
always been more of like a jack of all trades. And I remember while I was in the middle of that, it was just the worst because I'm like, what is happening? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't really know what my thing was, but now in retrospect, I know how to do almost everything at least a little bit, which has helped me so much um, in the long term. Just because like nothing seems scary. Do you know what I mean? Like even if I don't know how to do something, I can at least latch onto some part of it and like kind of figure it out.
Yep. No, for sure. I think like the CEO should be able to do like every task in the company to some extent. I had a couple things that I observed going back into the vault on your stuff a little bit. I found your Facebook page that hasn't been updated for years, and what I noticed is that you had some income reports, and it was like January 2017 income report, February 2017 income report, and a couple of people used to do this back in the day. The big one to me that popularized it was Johnny FD. Was Johnny a big inspiration for you? Did with his podcast, Travel Like a Boss, and with the income reports?
Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely came across his stuff. Not really something that I really follow anymore. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people at the time who influenced me. I think, like in that retrospect, like I was influenced a lot more by like Pat Flynn.
Mm.
Um,
He did
because
income
he
reports too, right?
forever he did
Yeah,
them, and they
yeah,
were
yeah.
actually like really well done. And I remember he stopped doing them because he said like they became not so what was the word he used, like unrelatable, because I mean there's a point when he was like doing like $1 million a month or whatever, something stupid like that. Not $1 million a month, but like let's say like $250,000 a month or something. And that's one thing, you know, if he's making like 10 grand a month and you can kind of see like where the money's going and all that kind of stuff. But when he's making that much money to anybody getting started, you're like, okay, well, like this is just numbers on a page and like they don't matter kind of thing when you're looking at his breakdowns. But I do
Sure.
think that that level of transparency stuck with me. And it was so, I could nerd out so much on those income reports of other people that I kind of wanted to do it myself. And then now, when you mention this, I hadn't really thought about this, but like is very likely something that contributed to me starting Parable, because like that's what we do inside of Parable is which is my community, which is I interview founders and we get really really in depth on their numbers, and we create infographics and like all the different kind of like looks at like where does the money go and all that kind of stuff. And like I could spend hours just looking at that kind of stuff because it's just so
Hmm.
interesting to me. And so it's an like it's just something that just dawned on me that of course, and now I run this community that does this because I'd spend hours looking at people's income reports when I was getting started.
There you go. So we found the origin of Parable in the Pat Flynn inspired income reports.
Yeah, for sure. You know, he was an early inspiration for us all.
And another one, another early on thing, like kind of your one of your first videos to pop on your YouTube channel back like 5 years ago or something, was a review of Gary Vee's course. And so he had a Udemy course that was like, what is it called? Like, build a personal brand. So it's like Gary V, build a personal brand. And so you obviously took that course. You must have taken notes, learned a lot, and you wrote or you made a review video on YouTube. So I guess early on, you must have had an idea to not only be a digital nomad and make your money and live in paradise, but you wanted to did you always kind of want to make a bit of a brand out of it?
It's an interesting question because it touches on something else that I've started realizing in the last year or so is like usually when I work with students, I tell them not to trust their gut when they're just getting started, because I think or not that they shouldn't trust their gut, but like if they have a mentor and their mentor is saying one thing and then their gut is saying something else and they are just getting started, like they're newbies, I always say like usually lean more on the mentor's opinion because they have more experience. Now, when you get
Mm-hmm.
more experience and you've been in it for years and years and years, you're going to absorb information and sometimes like your gut can find an answer that maybe your brain can't connect quite as much. So this is why like you speak with like legendary investors and they're like, I don't know, I didn't really make sense, but just something told me to do it, right? But there was like, I became obsessed with like online business and like all these people that were doing this kind of stuff and just took in so much of their content. And something about that to me made a lot of sense, if that makes sense. Like, um, I've always been very like I love doing stuff like this. I love creating. I love putting stuff out there. It's like one of my like big joys is seeing people get like help from it or interact with things that I do. And so like yeah, I've definitely always wanted to have more of a personal brand and I can't tell you why I wanted to have a personal brand, but something about it seemed important.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly to why when people would ask me, and this is like, going back to like what I said in the last couple of years, I started realizing that like I need to trust my gut more because I'm kind of making right choices or things that I'm predicting are coming true. And I don't always trust my gut as much as I need to because clearly I've reached that point perhaps where my gut knows things that maybe my brain doesn't. And so I remember, it's easy to forget that before COVID hit, remote work was kind of this like, it's like on the outskirts and like it's never going to be a big thing. Like, what I mean? There was a little like that was the opinion for the majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and obviously that's not the case anymore. So yeah, I mean, like, long story short, I do think that having a personal brand is important. And I think it's only going to become more important for more and more people. And your personal brand doesn't need to be Gary V. It can be like, you being really well known by the 100 people in your industry that are like decision makers. And that's a killer personal brand.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, what sort of helped me get over the hump was actually something I learned from Johnny FD. I remember he had a podcast episode that was something like, "You're not successful if you don't share what you learn." And so I was like, oh, that makes sense. I don't have to get up and grandstand about how I'm like the world's leading expert or something. I'm just sharing what I learn as I go along to help someone that's one or two steps before me. And I always found that relatable. And it makes sense. Like, if you're like, I have like another like way I think about it. Like, what if you were the CEO of like one of the biggest companies in the United States, like $10 billion a year in revenue, but it was private and you owned all the shares and it was just like B2B or something, and so there was no like exposure and you never told your friends. You could just be like the CEO of like a $10 billion company and like no one would ever know, and you could just like take it to the grave pretty much. And it's kind of like a, I don't know, there's no there's no like right or wrong here, but I just think it's like it would be like it's a very funny thing to think about. And I'm sure there's not too many people out there in that situation, but I mean, to me, like, when you look back on your legacy, I feel like, yes, if you help like increase like the efficiency and commerce of the world or whatever, like that's obviously honorable and increasing like technology. But I think like helping people and sharing what you learn is actually a big part of that.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I don't necessarily think that you have to teach what you're doing to be an industry leader because, like, Elon Musk, for example, isn't teaching people how to make electric cars, right? I
Hmm.
mean, like, there's certain things that or like how to like build rockets, right? There's certain things that he
He
might
builds
do
in
to
the
give.
open, though, to some extent.
Right. So, I mean, there are some patents that are open for sure, but like, I think it's far more like, I think your actions can speak way more about like what you're doing. And like, when you're watching somebody make certain moves, and if you're, I think it's easier to interpret for most people if they're building it in public. Right.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that if you build in public or you teach everything that you're learning, you yourself will learn a lot quicker because there's something about retelling the information where you learn it better, if that makes sense.
For
So
sure.
I'm a big fan of like
Yeah, everyone
whatever
knows
you
that.
learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever you learn, like teach it one step back, right? Because like just that you processing that information in the way to teach it, and it doesn't teaching doesn't mean like having to make a course, but like go out there and write a blog post on how to do it or whatever. That can help you understand it as well.
Agreed. All right, moving right along. So you did also mention how remote work has changed uh, in the face of in the face of COVID and the pandemic, and how being and how it basically really accelerated the onset of remote work for a lot of people and created the opportunity to work online for a lot of people uh, that didn't previously have that option. You and I were both working online before the pandemic. We knew about the digital nomad ism, and we made it our vision and our goal to work online, to have greater freedom. I mean, you grew up in Ohio, I grew up in Canada. Maybe like escaping winter was a part of that, and getting some sun and vitamin C. um, how have you seen the digital nomad community grow, or like what was kind of the before and after like in your eyes?
I mean, the really big one is like the one that we're kind of in the middle of, and that's only going to accelerate is the employeefication of the digital nomad movement, right? Because like majority of digital nomads before were in some way entrepreneurs, and now what we're
Hmm.
seeing is just a massive growth in the digital nomad community that are employees, like full-time employees of companies that are just like, yeah, this remote work thing works. Even if
Hmm.
it's not like completely um even if it's not completely location independent, meaning you can't go to any time zone in the world. There's so many people that are, for example, this is why I think Mexico and Central America and Latin America in general are going to grow a lot, is because it's really easy to go south, right? If you're working for an American company, you can
Yep.
travel and stay in the same time zone, or have like a lot of overlap. Now, I think it's going to take time for companies to sort of figure out the async thing, the asynchronous work aspect of it. But my guess is you're going to see that grow more, of like companies being able to say like, you must be on a US time zone overlap, to then going like, well, maybe we can just do like a 3 hour overlap, or maybe we can just do 2 hours overlap. But I will say that that is the really big, that is the predominant, I think, like shift that's occurring at the moment.
Yeah, it's true. I think a lot of the narrative used to be like you have to start a muse business, which you tried to do, or you have to start a startup, and it was either that, it was either like start like a full scale business, uh, Tropical MBA used to talk about the 1,000 day rule. If you remember the
Mm-hmm.
Tropical MBA, and they would say 1,000 day rule, it'll take 1,000 days to replace your previous full time income as a small business owner or freelancer. So it was either.
Well, and along that point, sorry to interrupt you, but like Dan
Go
from the
ahead.
Tropical MBA himself says, like, if if some of these jobs were options when I was getting started, I probably wouldn't have started the business. I'd have just gotten a nice paying
Exactly.
job and been a digital nomad with a salary.
Exactly. And then I look at all these like freelance things, and if you got to freelance, do it. If you can get good gigs that make sense to you, do it. But like if you do the math, you have to get a pretty big business going just to break even relative to what you would make as an employee, right? Because an employee is going to be making, in the US or Canada, they're going to be making minimum like 5K a month, probably closer to 10K a month. And if you have a business, what's your profit margin? And then after taxes and stuff like that, I mean, you probably need a 20 to 50K a month business to make the same that you make for as an employee. And you have a lot more responsibility. It's a lot more stress. Obviously, you can sort of work on the business, not in the business. You can automate things. You can do tax breaks. There's no right answer, but you got to keep in mind that, it's sometimes it is easier just to get the remote job. And um, there were some floating around prior to COVID, but there's definitely a lot more now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree and I disagree on certain parts. Like, I don't think you need to make that much more than, like, if you're, like, for example, if you're living in the US and you're earning $100,000 a year from your salary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you move to Mexico. You can live the same or a much better lifestyle for way less money. And if you can generate from some sort of freelance work 120K, your expenses realistically are going to be not that high, right? Like it's you if you're just working, right? So like let's say you even take out like 20K in total in expenses, like you're still going to be right around where you were earning before, even after taxes. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily need, it's different if you have like an e-commerce business, right? Where like your expenses are obviously, your cost of doing business is going to be
Right,
like
like
way
FBA or
higher because you
something.
have, yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't, I think the easiest thing that you can do if the employee thing doesn't suit you as much is to sell a service. Like whoever was hiring you, whatever you were doing for them, obviously they were getting a return on investment on your salary, right? Like if you're getting paid 100K at a company, they were paying you that much because there was a return on an investment for them. So there's no reason why you couldn't go out there and sell the skills that you are getting paid for by yourself and have some power over that. Because also, like, with the nice thing about doing that is you can decide how to work, right? So it doesn't mean that you need to work every single week of the year. Like you can work in
Mm-hmm.
spikes where like Naval calls it, like, I love this quote that he has, which is like, work like a lion, not a cow, right? Which is like essentially work a lot for a month or 2 months and then take like a month break and like go travel and do something, and then come back and you can get more gigs. Which I think is going to be the future, because when you look at the big picture and you look at the trajectory that remote work puts us on, the 9 to 5 salary essentially like gets squeezed on the one end by automation and on the other end by outsourcing, because
Mm-hmm.
work is going to like companies are going to automate as much as they can, right? Because that is the cheapest way for them to get done whatever they need to get done.
Mm-hmm.
However, the moment that a company figures out remote work, right? Like if you just follow the thought process there, you go, okay, well, if Kathy can get the job done from the suburbs, an hour and a half away from the office, and she's not really coming into the office anymore, then what's stopping us from there being a Kathy in Eastern Europe that we hire, but we just pay her 50% of what Kathy was getting paid?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that jump is all of a sudden not as big. The really big jump is to figure out how to work remotely so that that person, doesn't have to come into the office every day. It's not as big of a jump to actually then hire somebody from abroad. So essentially what ends up happening is these really well-paying jobs get squeezed on both ends, on one end by automation, on the other end by outsourcing. And in the long term, I think this is going to be good in terms that, like, we're not going to have this big of an inequality, right? Where if my parents moved to the United States to improve our economic life, meaning like they earn more money,
Mm-hmm.
now today they could go, well, do we do that, or do we just start working remotely for an American company, right? Like still they don't have the benefits of moving to the US and some of the nice things that come with that, but it's a much more real consideration. And so I think what's going to end up happening, just to wrap up my thought, is those people who were caught in the 9 to 5 really well paying jobs, maybe they won't be needed so much on a consistent basis, but they'll need to be brought in for specific projects. which, if you know how to do that, is actually really nice because it means like you can go do 3 projects a year, make a buttload of money because you have a very important specific knowledge that maybe whoever they're outsourcing to doesn't. And then you get to go away and like do something fun and hang out with family and go travel and then come back and do another project. So I think in the next, 5-10 years, if I had to put money on where things go, I think they're going to go in that direction way, way quicker.
Yeah, thanks for pushing back on what I said, and I agree 100% with what you're talking about. And yeah, this is what we alluded to earlier about how I definitely want to get your opinion, seeing around corners about what the future of work is going to look like. So I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I think we're kind of in that stage that you kind of touched upon, where these companies are figuring out how to let people work remotely for the first time. And some people right now are getting really, really lucky where they're making like 6-figure American incomes and they're probably not doing as much work as they were doing when they were in the office. You know what I mean? They're probably only doing like 2-3 hours of real work a day and they're just sort of like chilling, drinking coffee. And the company behind the scenes is just trying to figure out how to like keep the train moving basically and adapt to remote work. And so people are kind of good for now. But in, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, once, we have, a bit better softwares and things like that. And we've sort of just generally adapted more to remote work. A lot of these companies and, maybe English levels get better as well. Maybe it gets easier to pay people in different parts of the world, which we've seen with like Stripe and TransferWise and stuff like that. It makes it easier to just pay someone in Eastern Europe or Colombia or whatever. Um, that, yeah, I think you are going to see a flattening of the playing field, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just to touch on the what you said about the working hours, it's ridiculous that in the 21st century we think that like one of my hours is equal to one of that person's hours is equal to another person's 1 hours. At the end of the day, if I am all for like people working, instead of them working 8 hours a day and they're being paid for 8 hours, they can actually get their work done in like four and then do something else, that's fine. If you're getting the job done and you're creating the value that your company expects of you, which I think needs to be communicated, I don't care, right? Like, and I think that that's so beautiful, and it's something that, like, unfortunately, right now, employees kind of need to be like hush hush about. But in the grand scheme of things, who cares? Because I mean, for people who've worked in an office before, you're slacking off half the time, anyways, right? Like when you're all of a sudden told, like, hey, you can, instead of slacking off on the computer, get your stuff done in half the time, and then go hang out and do something else, and they become real motivated real quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think I I that's good, and I think companies need to be a little bit more, I think companies need to be a little bit more understanding of that, and I think there needs to be a conversation around it and find like a happy medium.
For sure. And there's another like micro trend within the remote workspace. I'm not sure if you've heard about, and I forget the name, but there's like a whole like Reddit forum dedicated to, and they're called like 2Xers or something. And it's basically like people that take on like 2 or 3 full-time jobs. And there's sort of like an expectation that they're working like 8 hours, but they're really just getting the work done in like 2, 3 hours, and they're just working like 3 full-time jobs and making like 3 full-time salaries. And there's all these like Reddit, threads and stuff like that where people are like, oh, I'm making like 300K now. I'm working 2 hours a day, like here, there, and the other place. And whatnot. I was wondering if you'd seen that and just what your thoughts are on this little micro trend that I think is kind of funny.
I have heard of it. My first thought is it's hilarious, and I think it just goes to show. I don't really have an opinion on it. Like, I don't think, if I had to guess, it doesn't sound very sustainable. Like, I don't think anybody can work 3 different jobs and juggle that for an extended period of time. But I think it's more like evidence of exactly what we're just talking about, where you're expected to work 40 hours a week. You're expected to go in and work 8 hours a day. And Like I think work just kind of balloons to fit that. And then all of a sudden, when you're
Hmm.
removed from that scenario and no one's watching over your shoulder, as long as this is my thing, like I want to make this very clear, as long as you're getting done what you're supposed to get done and there is no drop in quality, I think it's a great like evidence point, like a data point of that,
Hmm.
I think you don't need to maybe do things the way we've been doing them, because the 40-hour work week is from like the industrial era where literally
Hmm.
every
Hmm.
person's hour was the same, sitting on like the assembly line.
Hmm. And so, in this trend of people sort of getting squeezed at the edges by automation and sort of a worldwide labor market and things like that, we've talked a bit about creating a brand, branding yourself as an authority or expert, which will kind of help you to charge more per hour. What do you think people can do to sort of fight back against these trends and ensure that they stay employable and in demand?
I think this is so. I would say there's two things. One of them is to start developing your entrepreneurial muscle, because that type of an economy, like that type of like a labor market, like you called it, is going to be more entrepreneurial. Like doesn't necessarily mean like like what you think about an entrepreneur in terms of like a startup founder, but it's certainly going
Hmm.
to require more of that muscle, more of that skill set. So I think starting, if you have a job right now that's taking care of your financial
Expenses.
needs,
Yeah.
yeah, your expenses, go start a side hustle and just start like, something that's like it's just for fun. Learn, get exposed to that, figure out how that works, just kind of like play with it. And then the other thing is the personal brand really is very important, because the people who are going to get the jobs, or in the future the sort of these projects that we're talking about, like these gigs, which now when we think about gig work we think about like very small like paying jobs, but like
Hmm.
imagine if the gig economy grows up, right? It reaches adulthood and these are like 10, $20,000 projects. The people who are going to get the job done are the ones who have the best brand around that. They're going to be the people who have a name that is respected by an industry. And so starting to do things that in the eyes of the industry make you um appear as an industry expert are going to be
Hmm.
really important. And these are the things that in like 10 years are really going to pay dividends. So I think podcasting, for example, is like, I mean, I know that as like a podcaster, it might seem that I'm biased, and I'm sure there's some bias, but this is like one of the most like it's like the best way to create. It's so easy. You just set up a microphone. You don't This is like a $50 microphone. You can use Zoom, which is free for up to 45 minutes or whatever it is. Actually, for one person it's free for like as long as you want. And record interviews with other industry experts, and like publishing that and putting out your ideas out there is such a great way to you know, show that you're an industry expert, but also get to know other industry experts and create a network that in the,
Hmm.
in the long term can actually like help you out to get work and all these sort of things.
Definitely. So maybe we can actually talk about podcasting for a second, because I wouldn't mind asking you. You've
Mhm.
been doing pretty well at it. um, so you started in 2019. You've been going like 3 years strong, consistency. How big of like this is going to be very like random, but how big of like a backlog of episodes do you have? Do you have like 10 recorded, ready to go episodes so that you can like take time off if you need to, or?
No. I would love for that to be the case, but I don't. Sometimes I'll have a backlog. Like the happy place for me is like 2 or 3 episodes. I think 10 episodes, while in theory sounds great, it kind of I don't think it's good, because it's nice to have some relevancy. Like it's nice to bring up things that are happening in the moment,
Hmm.
in the sphere, and like that way will be like delayed. And I don't know if you've ever listened to podcasts that do have a really long backlog, but you can almost feel it. Like you can almost feel that it was recorded a while ago. And I've caught that before where I'm like, hold on, they just mentioned something like it just happened, but actually happened like 2 months ago. And that to
Mm-hmm.
me is like interesting. So for me, like I think the happy place would be like 3 weeks, right? Like having like 3 episodes backlogged is
Mm-hmm.
the my goal. Unless of course like something's happening where I'm like, hey, I want to take like a break and have like 2 months off, or I foresee that there's something happening. Like, yeah, of course, in that case, like I'll create like a bigger backlog. But for me, like 2 or 3 episodes backlog is I'm a happy camper.
Okay. And so you've had a lot of really, really good guests actually. How do you like source your guests? Like how much outreach do you do? At this point, do you have a lot of inbound?
I do have a lot of inbound at this point, but I kind of have a rule about not really taking anyone who's inbound because I find that the best interviews, like the interviews that I enjoy the most and the interviews that listeners enjoy the most, are the ones in which you can like tell I've been very curious for a long time and have kind of like naturally, like I'm really excited to talk to that person. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really accept a lot of pitches. It must be like somebody who, like, sometimes I'll accept a pitch where somebody pitches me and I'm like, oh, I've been wanting to talk to this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But usually I just kind of like follow my curiosity, and I'll find interesting people for whatever reason, or maybe somebody who I've met in person and I love their story, or somebody whose writing I've really enjoyed, or whatever it may be. I've become like, I had like a Google Doc at one point where I'm like, the perfect guest is blah 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 blah, and there were a bunch of points, and I actually gave it to a virtual assistant to go and like find people and then like send out outreach emails, and it was just like, I don't know, they did a great job. It was like I was just like, meh, like this didn't exactly turn out the way I wanted it to. So I just reach out to people who I think are interesting and who I'm generally like genuinely curious to speak with. So
Yeah. And is it mostly like through Twitter or emails, or what do you find works best for the outreach?
um I mean, Twitter is a new one for me. Like Twitter just in general for me is new, and I'm very excited about it and I really really like it, and it's worked well for guests, but it's new. In the past has been Instagram or email.
Okay.
Or like a connection, like, or someone who's been on my podcast who I know
Right.
knows them, or something like that.
And they just share the WhatsApp contact, do a little intro maybe.
Yeah, or do like an email, yeah, introduction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess, and just for a little bit of context for people, one thing that really caught my attention, I had to open it in a tab here, was that you actually just shared your numbers last week for the pod downloads of the podcast, and so it looks like you've cracked 2,000 downloads a month, a couple of times on different months, and you're actually hitting like all time highs now. You've done, I guess, like over 50K downloads in the past 2 years. I'm not familiar with this software or like dashboard though. Where's this coming from?
That particular one is Transistor, which is my hosting platform.
Okay, cool. And then yeah, so I'm using Zencaster. Um, and sort of a related question. I noticed that you don't put all the episodes on YouTube, or if you do, you sort of like name it differently or like upload it a little bit differently. Is there a reason why you kind of only put the podcast on the podcasting platform and not YouTube?
Just production wise, I was doing like 3 videos a week on YouTube for like a few months, and I just kind of got burnt out, and I was trying to do
Mm-hmm.
too many things. I love YouTube. Like for me,
Mm-hmm.
video is kind of like the master content, so to say. And so
Uh-huh.
for a while there, I was making podcasts with like video first, and then like the audio was getting like pulled into like as like a podcast format.
Yeah.
Then I spoke with somebody who works in the field and actually gave me some advice around like like long form hour plus podcasts don't do well on YouTube. They can actually like hurt you unless you're like massive. Like if you're Joe Rogan, it's like a different story. But
Uh-huh.
you like essentially what he suggested was doing like 10 to 15 minute clips of each episode and just kind of like finding kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a hot take chapter at 10, 15 minutes and putting it up that way. And it was just taking too much work. So it's something that I hope to come back to eventually. I just need to have like better operations and systems set up to support that.
Yeah, I would love to contract out like a clipper guy that could put together like reels.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal. Like I would love to have like my interviews and then they get broken up into like 10-15 minute little chapters of a podcast that go up on YouTube, and then the hot takes out of those like, end up becoming like short like social media thing. Yeah, that's like, but it's just that takes quite a bit of like systems and operations, and you also need to have somebody who knows what your audience is looking for. They can judge, is this a good clip or not, so that you don't have to be the person that's like minute 43 30 seconds to minute 44 15. You know what I mean?
Right. So what do you attribute the growth of the podcast to? Because it has obviously pretty consistently grown over time. And where is most of the traffic coming from? Like, is a lot of it from search within like the SEO of the podcast platforms? Because you do sort of write good titles and stuff, or where does the growth come from?
That's a good question. To be completely honest, I don't know. I think I think some people do find it just from searching. I think also at this point, when you've been around for a little while, you definitely start to get some credibility. And like I said, like I interview people I'm interested in, and I interview people who I think people who listen to my podcast can tell that I'm genuinely very interested in the people I talk with. And I think
Hmm.
that comes through. So I think there's quite a bit of like uh like person to person recommendations, if I had to guess. And the other thing that's been kind of surprising and also a very nice boost of confidence for me has been people who I really respect who have then come to me and have been like, "Oh yeah, like I like your podcast. Like I listened to your podcast. It was recommended by so and so." Um so I don't know, honestly. Those are just my best guesses. Like I don't think social media really does anything. I mean, I'm sure it gets some like traction from that, but I don't know, man. I think Spotify does a good job. I know actually I have the most subscribers on Spotify. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't know, man.
How many
I
subs
you're
are there on Spotify?
I think we're about to cross 800.
Okay.
Which it's weird because like I don't know, man. These like statistics podcasting wise like don't really mean anything. um they're so like bizarre, like some things like what is a subscriber, and I think like I listen to Spotify's the most because theirs is like literally like somebody who clicked subscribe and they have like the exact like data because it's their platform.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Well, you've been consistent. You've been getting good guests. Um, yeah, I almost feel like I know the answer and it's going to be underwhelming, but like, what do I have to look forward to when I hit like 1 year of podcasting, 2 years, a little bit of extra credibility, the base will grow a bit. Maybe I'll start getting more inbound. I've already been getting like really good guests and stuff, but like, what did you have any like epiphanies or aha moments along the way? Did you ever like pivot slightly in how you did it? How's like the journey been?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the biggest epiphany is consistency really matters, because no one, like I've had some, like you've said, like I've had some people come on the podcast who I've been shocked to have said yes, right? Like I had the CEO and founder of Evernote. That's
Yeah,
kind of
I
bizarre to
saw
me,
that.
right? um so, and the reason why people do it is when they see consistency, they assume, even if it's not like tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people listening, at least it will be like good, right? And
Uh-huh.
so I think like that is important. And then also like it shows the fact that like I said, like it does prove some industry expertise, because at the very least it shows like you've done repetitions, like you've thought about these topics, you've discussed them, and so anywhere you go it does give you a level of credibility. um So like, yeah, have I pivoted? Oh hell yeah, man. Like I'm a big like believer in like if I'm not having fun, something's wrong. And actually there was a break where I didn't publish for like a month or something like that. Maybe at the end of 2021. I was just kind of like, where is this going? I that's kind of when I started taking more inbound people, and I was just like bringing on people that were being pitched to me, and I was just not having as much fun. So, like, one of the things that I'm trying to do more of now is actually not necessarily having a new guest every single week, but bringing people back on that I think are smart. I'd rather have a guest on two, three, four times, but make it like a really fun episode and like really get into the weeds of things than just kind of having
Hmm.
like a topical conversation every week. So, um, like, I love having my friend Chase Warrington on, for example, who's the head of Doist. Like him and I can like shoot the shit for hours, and we do it offline anyway. So that's one of the things that like I like I would love to have him on more so that we can kind of get in the weeds of different topics.
No, dude, it's funny you mentioned that. I 100% agree. I just recorded my first podcast with a repeat guest yesterday, with Martin Toomey, who I had on as episode 11. And he had like a crappy mic. He told me he bought a new one. I said, you know what, let's celebrate. Let's do another one. The second episode was so good, like so much new information, so high value. We basically did like an hour and a half deep dive on like Mexican residency options,
Mm-hmm.
and like different things, which I know you know a little bit about as well. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, it is good to have on repeat guests because the first time you get them on, they might not be an experienced guest, so they're kind of nervous about being recorded. They might have sort of like a couple like talking points. You have to do like a semi lame like hero's journey introduction. But if you have on a repeat guest,
Mm-hmm.
like you can just like start shooting the shit. You can start really like getting into deep topics right off the bat. So I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, like those have been some of my favorite podcast episodes that I've done. Like I said, like having Chase on or Gonzalo from Nomad X. Now he's the CEO of Nomad X. Dan
Hmm.
Andrews from Tropical MBA. I always love having him on and talking with him. I've had Andrew Henderson on a few times from Nomad Capitalist. Of
Wow.
course, my friends Travis Sherry and Jason Moore, who both have their own travel podcasts. My wife has been on a few times, which is super fun. And like, having her on, my friend, Nathan from Foodie Flashbacker, he, travels all over the world as well. So it's fun to have him on. He's been like a nomad for forever. So like, yeah, and these are really fun conversations. And it's literally like, uh, you know, we have these talks anyways offline. So like, let's bring in the listeners as well.
That's awesome. I didn't know you actually had one with Dan Andrews. I just sort of like said Tropical MBA because I thought you would have known about it. That's awesome. That would be like a dream guest for me.
Yeah,
Um,
he's been on. I think he's been on twice. But yeah, I speak to him, relatively regularly. And I really appreciate his. I'm part of the Dynamite Circle, which is their community. But like,
uh-huh.
I think he's what I really like about him is he's very I don't know if retrospective is the right word, but whenever he comes on, he always does a good job of being like, "Hey man, like this is hard work, and there's all these, and like there's no right or wrong answer." Like he kind of gives you a very deep answer. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. For sure. I guess quick question. What's the Dynamite Circle like these days? Is it still chugging? Is it still good?
Yeah, I mean, they just did an event. They're doing an event right now in Mexico that I wasn't able to go to, but they did an event in Mexico City in October, and it was awesome. It was my first one because I actually joined right before COVID hit off, so I got to meet some of these people online, which was really great. But really, going down there and doing one of those conferences, just really high level conversations and hanging out and getting to meet some of these people that I've known online for years,
Hmm.
and then getting to hang out in person and like have beers, and it was yeah, it was great, and I'm very excited to see kind of what happens now post COVID as more places open up and hopefully more people can attend live events again.
Yeah, because it was so meetup oriented and like, you definitely get FOMO hearing about the old like DCBKK events and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think they describe themselves as an events company, right? Like they have an online community, but I think, you know, and I mean, I don't know if Dan would agree or not, but like so much of it is around like it's almost like the community is there to like hold things together uh and keep everyone together until they do another event. Like I think that's everybody's favorite part.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Maybe I should look into that now that we got my Latin life chugging. I got something to potentially contribute and talk about. And then another one, I noticed you had something about the Nomad Capitalist Live on your YouTube channel, sort of like a review of the event. Did you go to any of them in Mexico or anywhere else?
No, I actually had a friend of mine, Chapin Cruder, who was like a media coverage person. He was asked to go there and like cover the event.
Hmm.
And so I saw that he went, and I was just very curious. It's I don't belong amongst those people. Like their net worths are like ridiculously huge and dwarf mine. But I just wanted to hear what it was like and what was going on there and that kind of stuff. And so I know they have another one coming up soon, which actually I was like, I'm gonna reach out to Andrew and see if he wants like somebody to go cover the event or whatever. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't. It sounds like it was a good event.
And we're going to have to talk a little bit about Latin America before we wrap up, talk a bit about Mexico. One last question, sort of about podcast audience or your audience in general. Because, and Nomad Capitalist makes me think about this question because he's very much like 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs. Like, that's my market, like, blah, blah, blah. So, your audience is kind of more scrappy people. People are typically probably earlier in their journey of working online, making money, things like that. Um, how do you think about like how do you think about monetizing your audience or having an offer to sell to them? It kind of also feeds into the like, what's the future of the podcast? What keeps you going? Like, have you found an offer that works? Because here at My Latin Life, there's like a couple different people that are into it. There's digital nomads, there's people who are looking to travel, and they're not there's not much like of like an offer to put together for those people. But then there's people that come to me and they're like, oh, like I'm going to retire. I want to buy property in Latin America. I need my taxes figured out. I need residency, blah, blah, blah. And there's like a million things you can like offer these people. And so for me, like I'm sort of like having to balance the two, but I was just curious how you think about, providing value to your audience in that way in the future of your podcast and how you address your audience.
Yeah. So, I think the interesting thing here is that a podcast listener is going to be like the warmest lead ever, just
True.
because it's such a personal experience. Like more than any other type of content, when you have somebody's ideas and thoughts and like and voice in your ear day after day, and I'm sure that you've experienced this with other podcasts that you've listened to where like you almost know them, and then when you like if you like ever met somebody who you listen to on repeat, you're almost like, oh my god, like I know everything about you, and it's so funny that your dog's name is Charlie, and like whatever, right? It can get kind of creepy sounding real quick. And because of that, I do think like, it's funny, I was just having this discussion on Twitter with someone. It's like it's not a top of the funnel thing, right? Where it's like your podcast is almost like where somebody comes in and just finds out about you and they're like, oh, interesting, they have a podcast, and they start listening to the podcast. And then they become a very warm audience. Um, and so in terms of like how I like monetize it, I am considering bringing on a sponsor for the first time.
Hmm.
In the past, I've just never even thought about it because my audience wasn't big enough and like the podcast wasn't big enough. And, recently, like you said, the podcast has been growing, which is great. And on top of that, I've had conversations with like marketing leads at some companies that have actually like expressed interest, which has been great. And I've realized like, oh, this is actually interesting to some people now. So my plan is like my content will always be free. Like my podcast will always be free to people. I'd love to bring on a sponsor to, at minimum, make it like self sufficient, right? Like the podcast itself to be self sufficient.
Hmm.
Because I have an editor and all that kind of stuff, and people who help me out with that. So, them being able to be paid out of the podcast would be sweet. And then you know, there's going to be different types of people who listen to the podcast, and those people may be interested into different things. So, like right now, a majority of my revenue comes in from like coaching programs, because I've found that that works well and that I can create a lot of benefit for people. And then, Parable is obviously growing, but memberships take a while, to be honest. Like they almost need to kind of like, they grow very slowly in the beginning because you need like network effects and these sort of things to start working, which is starting to happen now with Parable. But it's going to be a specific type of person that ends up going into Parable, right? It's not going to be the right thing for everyone who listens to my podcast. Um, and then I think, like I said, there's always like the potential to use the expertise and the credibility I've developed around the topics that I discuss to do like lots of different service things or products or whatever down the road. So I don't really look at it as like, is the podcast my product? It's more like I listen to the people who are listening to the podcast and see if there's any way that I can solve their problem, right? Is there like a problem they have that I can solve? And is there then the overlap of, is this a problem that I'd like to solve?
Hmm.
And wherever that happens is, uh, something I'd like to work on.
Yeah, no, I can tell you're like a super genuine guy, and that's what makes talking to you a pleasure. Is that um, like some people would they'd be like, get this like broke audience away from me, like trying to scrape together $1,000 or whatever. You know what I mean? But like you're just so enthusiastic about remote work and the future and where things are headed, and opening people up to new opportunities, and it's just and I think when you have that genuine enthusiasm and excitement, good things are going to spring from that anyway.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Like, yeah, I think I'm just. There's been so many times when somebody has been like, "Hey, man, like, I need some help with this. Like, I don't really understand." I'm like, let's do it. Like, let's jump on a call. Like, how can I help you? Like, can I move this along for you? So, because I don't know, man. Like, I just like talking about this stuff. I'm so interested in it. So,
For sure. And so do you do like paid coaching where you like help people ramp up to working online and becoming a freelancer and stuff?
yeah. So, that is, like I said, my main gig at the moment, so to say. And it's like one of these things like, wow, Parable is the long term goal and like that's growing. And I do like hot seats inside of that. And we have like an on ramp that I'm actually updating at the moment because like my biggest thing is stop taking in more content. Like take action first, then learn, right? Which I think
Hmm.
is like a Sahil Bloom quote. Maybe I'm saying that I'm crediting the wrong person. But like take action first, and then when you run into an issue, then look for help. And so many people do the opposite. Like we're told like you must learn this and this and this and this and this and this. And I like coaching because with coaching I know I can help you. Like we can get on a call right away, and I'm like, great. Like, like what's going on? Give me some background. Like, let me learn. What are you trying to do? Like, it's very easy for me to identify your issues and like
Hmm.
almost push you past them, right? And it's relatively lucrative in terms of like people are paying for my time and expertise.
Hmm.
So you can get paid hourly pretty well. And it also I think too many people shy away from that because it also makes you better. Like when I sit down and I have like Thursdays are like my call day, so I have like coaching calls all day. Like I get super sharp because when I see this problem and I've helped someone solve it multiple times, I get to talk through it and like, okay, this worked for this person, it didn't work for that person, right? Like how can I retell this differently to this other person? Like you know what I mean? It kind of like sharpens your skill. Like we talked about earlier, teaching someone else makes you way more of a master at that thing because you need to figure out a way to communicate it to lots of different people.
And just real quick, like what is the business model, or how do you structure the coaching?
I've tried a bunch of different things. Like I've done just like hourly, but I don't like that. Like I right now like these 12-week sprints because I've just found that and I don't like coaching that's like, hey man, we're just doing this for eternity, right? Because it's not good for you, it's not good for me. because you don't have any sort of like due date. So like at the moment, what I do is I work like the people who are my sweet spot that I found I do a really good job with are what I call corporate runaways. Like they're people who have corporate experience. They may be like 3, 4, 5 years minimum working some sort of corporate job and are trying to figure out how to take that skill and transition it into either like a product or a startup or some sort of service. And we work in 12 weeks because what we do is like literally week one is we're like, okay, great. Where do you want to be in 12 weeks? What is the goal here? What are the parameters that we need to set up? What is like the structure that we need to set up for you? And then, it's like almost like a bit of like front loading of my work and time to create a plan and like what are some of the issues that we
Right.
may come across and then just supporting them whatever way I can through that process.
Okay, cool. So like a 12-week mentorship type
Like a
model.
cohort. Yeah.
Yeah, cohort. Makes sense. And then so how do you do it? Do you get them on a free call first and then try to like close them quote unquote into the program? Do you make them pay for that first call and then say like, hey, we can like extend it out? Or how do you kind of like, you know what I mean? Like how formal is it? How do you do that? How do you onboard them?
Um, I don't really have a good answer to that. I usually have like I take on only a certain amount of people per cohort. And this is relatively new, like this isn't something that I've done like 100 times. So, this is just what's worked a few times.
Uh-huh.
But I just know already usually who I want to work with. And it might be like, people come from different places. There's some people that I've worked with in the past who have just now come into a new issue. Maybe, there's a bunch of maybe they're listeners to the podcast who have connected with, whatever it may be. Right. And I'll just reach out to them and I'm very honest. And I'm always like, I don't do pushy, salesy crap. I'm always very honest. And usually, like, what I do is I say, like, hey, I know you're going through so and so and so, like, from what you've told me, I'm putting on this cohort, whatever it is, training. Like, I'd love to, like, let's jump on a call and I want to see if it's a right fit for you. And if not, like, it's fine. Like, I'd love to get your feedback or what you think about it. And that's worked pretty well. And, just kind of lead into it. And I like, if it's not a win for you, I don't want your money because it's not going to be valuable for you. And so I only want people coming in and working with me who I know I'm going to get them results. Um, and so I just kind of go into it that way and I have a conversation and if it seems like a right fit for me and it seems like a right fit for them, then we go for it. And if not, like there's been times where people are like, "Hey, like I'm really into this, but it's not a good time for me." Right? Or it's not, like maybe like let's do this like later and then they end up, doing it like next time, like next go around.
Okay. That's awesome. Excuse me. And that's awesome. I could definitely ask you more about that, but I don't know. I'll leave it alone. I don't want to grill you too hard on like business model stuff.
I'm man, I don't know if you can tell, but I am an open book. Like as long as it's not something that like I'm comfortable answering for whatever reason, I'm happy to help any way I can.
No, it's cool. It's cool. I thought we'd kind of end the episode kind of on some light stuff, just talking about Mexico, talking about Latin America. I don't even think we mentioned it at the start of the episode, but I think we're in the same state in Mexico right now. I'm in Guadalajara. You are in Vallarta. I assume you're on the Jalisco side
Yes, I am.
because the Puerto Vallarta. A lot of it's like there's like a river that runs through Vallarta, and on the other side of the river is the state of Nayarit,
Mm-hmm.
where it's Punta Mita and Sayulita and San Pancho and all that.
Yeah. It's like the bay is split in two.
hmm And I love the area. It's funny. I went to Vallarta for the first time just in February. I flew there from Playa del Carmen. I said, you know what? I want to get to know the Pacific side a little bit of Mexico. I hear the sunsets are good. Let's see what's going on. I heard, and I had all these sort of like expectations because I've spent a lot of time in Mexico, like over years, and I had never been on the West Coast at all. and So I went over there, and honestly, it blew my expectations away. Like Vallarta was so much better than I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be like more of just like a tourist playground, sort of, or just sort of like more like resort oriented. But it actually is like not that resorty. It's a very like thriving real city. I thought the nature was amazing. The Bahia de Banderas, like the big bay that Vallarta's in is like amazing. It's so nice. It's huge. I thought the beaches were way better than I thought they'd be. I thought the sand was nicer than I thought it would be. The sunsets were amazing. I liked all the mountains like just behind the city. So there's just amazing views like everywhere. Like everywhere you look, there's like huge mountains in the back. Like I remember the first night I was there, we're like, and I was just like, yo, like this looks like the Italian Riviera. This looks like Napoli. Like you got like the beach and then like a crazy huge mountain in the background, like way bigger than I would have expected. And yeah, I could keep going, but overall, like I really like Vallarta a lot more than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, like that's why we decided to base ourselves out of here for 6 months, and it's like why we came back here after visiting here, coming here for the first time last year. Was I'm a water guy. First of all, like I grew up by the water, so I'm always like wanting to be by water. And I really liked it here because I really like visually, it's very stimulating in terms of like you have like you mentioned like the mountains running into the water, which I think is a very nice mix. Like people
Hmm.
really lose their crap over like sea views, and sure like I like a sea view as well, but for me it's the two running into each other that's really like striking and really beautiful.
Agreed.
um and then it has this, like, I don't know if you know this term solar punk, but Puerto Vallarta is very solar punky, if you know what that means. It's like
I
this like
don't. Please tell.
futuristic. So solar punk is like, you know what like cyberpunk is, if you know like what that looks like image wise.
Not overly. I'm picturing like a DeLorean or something.
Yeah, like cyberpunk is sort of like um a slightly like a futuristic city that has kind of like not taken the right turn. Like it's usually dirty and like it's over, like there's like no trees and it's like all gray and like tech and like whatever. Like if you Google like pictures, you'll see what I mean. And solar punk is sort of like what if like the future went in a way in which like we incorporated more nature into our like urban environments. And so it's usually these futuristic looking cities, but with like lots of green. And I think Puerto Vallarta has a lot of that because, like you said, like the mountains are right there. And like literally, there's like, you're in a city and then there's a street and then it's a jungle, right? And at the same time, though, because there's a lot of like property development here for good or bad. There's a lot of like outside money coming into Puerto Vallarta. Outside money meaning like coming from Canada and the US specifically. Like there's a lot of very nice tall buildings. And so it does have that solar punky vibe to it, which I enjoy.
That being said, though, I felt like there wasn't that many high rises. There was actually like it's actually the whole beach was just lined with like 3 4 story buildings, and I was just looking at this for the most part, and I was just looking at this, and I was like, yo, like I wonder what this is going to look like 100 years from now when it sort of looks maybe more like a Balneario Camboriú, Brazil, or a Dubai or something like that, where it's like true like skyscrapers on the beach. Because it's really not like that. It's still like very chill, low rise buildings. But I definitely agree that I love cities that have both mountains and ocean at the same time. So you might think about like a Vancouver, a Barcelona, a Napoli. There's not too many cities that do it and do it well, and that's one thing I like about Vallarta is they do it really really well.
Yeah, there's some cities in the Balkans that have a similar vibe as well because that mountain range is so intense. So I'm
Hmm.
sure you're gonna have. I've never been to Albania, which is weird because I grew up like a stone's throw away from there. But like I'm sure they have some cities there, but like they're not gonna have skyscrapers. Varna, where I'm from, they have that a little bit as well, and maybe that's why I like it so much. Is it like I don't know, it feels nice, it feels homey in some way.
Hmm. On the ocean better though, and especially the Pacific, because you basically get to see the sun setting over the ocean, and it just like falls over the water, and it's really so much better than when it falls over land or a hill or a random building. Like watching the sun set over the water, and then particularly in Vallarta for whatever reason, the like afterglow. So when the sun like falls below the visible field below the ocean, and it's like the afterglow, and it's like orange and red and purple. In Vallarta, it was like so nice and so beautiful every night. It was crazy.
Yeah, and there's this like here there's this thing about sunsets because they are so beautiful. So like there's so many rooftop bars that like you can go and like watch the sunset, which is always nice. And there's one
Hmm.
actually across the street from us here that we'll go, and very often we'll go watch the sunset there. And the other thing that's nice about Puerto Vallarta that we haven't really mentioned outside of the nature is the infrastructure, because the
Hmm.
Wi-Fi, there's a lot of places on the West Coast don't actually have good internet, and here in Puerto Vallarta, the internet is actually like decent. Like you can find good internet, and the airport is actually like it punches above its weight because it's actually a relatively small airport, but it's well connected, which is always nice.
It is. There's like direct flights from like Calgary, Winnipeg, Vancouver, a bunch of Canadian cities. Obviously, a lot of the US, especially on the west coast of the US. So think like Oregon, Washington State, things like that, like, Arizona. So, like, I find that um, East Coast people typically go to the Playa del Carmen and Riviera Maya, and then West Coast North Americans, I mean, typically go to Vallarta, and increasingly like Mazatlan and Acapulco and things like that.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the east coast of Mexico has become overrun, especially during and post COVID. Like Playa is
Agreed.
like
Agreed.
nomad. It's like it's so many nomads there. And so that's one of the reasons why we look for other places. Not because I don't like nomads. Like obviously, like I love this community, but it's nice to be somewhere where there's like maybe a little bit more local. And it's kind of a funny statement for Puerto Vallarta because there is a lot of like expats that live here. Um, but yeah, I don't know. We like it here. It's a little
Uh-huh.
bit like Puerto Vallarta is a bit expensive, especially where we are here in Zona Romantica. It's quite expensive, which is kind of the big downside.
I remember I would go to these sort of like a set of taco stands outside this like big like pharmacy or grocery store in Zona Romantica, and the
Yeah.
particular taqueria was called La Hormiga, I believe, which means the ant. And there's kind of like two or three there, and I was like, this stand is unreal. Like they really had it going.
Yeah, I know. That's down the street from me, actually. So, yeah, I know it well. It's the Guadalajara pharmacy in town, which is like
Yeah,
the only
yeah, yeah.
legit pharmacy because all the other pharmacies, and anyone who's been to Mexico is going to know this, are selling like every drug that you shouldn't be able to buy, but you somehow can. So yeah.
Hmm. And have you gone to check out like Sayulita and some of the beach towns over there? And what's your thoughts on that?
I really like Sayulita. Um, my only thing is that I don't think it's like the internet isn't good enough yet.
It's not.
Specifically for me, like I think if you don't need to do video calls and that kind of stuff, it's not so bad. But having to do podcasts and like upload stuff and like download, and it's just not quite there yet. But the reason why we like Puerto Vallarta is like it takes us like an hour to get up to Sayulita, so it's not that crazy. Of hey, we want to go spend like a long weekend up there, like let's go,
Uh-huh.
or even there's like
Yeah, you can
Yalapa,
Uber
which is
there. Yeah.
yeah, we or InDriver, which is the other one that's like the local one here, which has even cheaper
Yep.
prices.
DD.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I really like it. I really, really enjoy it. I feel more relaxed there. It's just like if you're, I don't know if I'd stay there for 3 months, for example, which is what we like to do. Is like we like to do 3 month home bases.
Mhm.
So
And at this point, have you got your Mexican residency?
we're planning on doing that in the fall. We haven't yet gotten it.
Okay. And have there been any other Latin American cities where you've spent significant time, or other regions of Mexico that you've spent time?
So I haven't spent a lot of time in Latin America. Mexico is kind of as further south as the furthest south I've gone. But yeah, we've traveled around quite a bit. We spent quite a bit of time in Merida, which I like, but it's just too hot. And you kind of have like a couple of months there where it's fine, but then like it gets really hot, so it's just not like a good like long term place for me. But like it's a beautiful city. It's like super super safe. Really great food, great cafes. Really enjoyed that. Love Mexico City, obviously. I mean, I think Mexico City is it's like the biggest and least discovered city by a lot of North Americans, because like if you talk to anybody like in the US, they think it's like super dangerous. And I'm sure there's parts of Mexico City that are dangerous, but I love Mexico City. Um, we've spent some time in Oaxaca. We've spent some time in Guanajuato, which is actually where we're going after here to go cool off, quote unquote, in the mountains. Um,
Nice.
so yeah.
That's awesome. Um, and so, yeah, I'd be curious on your perspective as, I don't even know what to call it, like a big digital nomad advocate guy. Like, what do you think are some of the biggest digital nomad hotspots in Latin America based on the buzz, based on what people are talking about, what you've heard about? And if you had to, and we're including like Colombia and everything else in that. Um, if you had to sort of like rank them by buzz or rank them by places where you think there's like the highest concentration of digital nomads, what would be like the top 5, top 10?
I mean, definitely Playa, for better or for worse. I think Medellin for sure has a lot of people there. I think Brazil is coming up more and more. Like I hear Brazil more often. My friend Gonzalo is obviously doing a lot of work down in Brazil, which maybe is why I'm hearing about it more. Um, I feel like Costa Rica has always been on the map, although it kind of doesn't have a brand yet. Like I feel like they haven't quite dialed in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I really think Mexico is going to be a really big one going forward. I hear Buenos Aires a lot as well, but I think at that point you're starting to get a little bit far, and they have some economic issues that I think make people a little bit uncomfortable at the moment. I just think in general Mexico is, again, for better or worse, is going to get a majority of it because it's so easy for most Americans and Canadians to just come down here. I just hope it
Definitely.
spreads out more. Like it shouldn't be like 80% of the population in Playa shouldn't be Americans and Canadians that are nomading there. So I hope there's a lot of great places, and I just hope it like spreads out a bit more.
Yeah, and I've contributed to that. I've spent a lot of time in Playa. I know it inside out. I'd still recommend it to like anyone that hasn't been. It's still awesome, and there's probably like a higher concentration of entrepreneurs and digital nomads than anywhere else in the world per capita. And if you just pull up to a cafe, you're for sure going to meet interesting people. Um, but it's expensive. It's kind of hard to find an apartment. That's kind of why I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna take a flight to Vallarta because it was just like these, apartments were getting like snatched out from under me when I thought I was overpaying like $1,200 a month. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. I was like, all right, whatever. Let's just go check out something else. And all the police and Playa and stuff on every corner. And I got to Vallarta. I could finally use Uber again. Um, and I speak like Spanish, like I can negotiate with the cabs or whatever, but I just way prefer not having to like, I prefer, the cab being there pulled up in front on the street, when I exit my building. And, not having to deal with cops and, things like that. So Vallarta just like was just a so much lower like stress level and everything. So I really liked it in that regard. I think there's also a lot of digital nomads in Mexico City, like a lot. And I think particularly for not just entrepreneurs, but for like the corporate runaways that you're talking about. I think a large percentage of the corporate runaways have gone to Mexico City because they're familiar with like city infrastructure. They wanted direct flights. They wanted to be somewhere like big and thriving type of vibe. and prices have gone up a lot there. And there's been, you've probably seen articles about it and stuff like that. Um, but then I really think like the West Coast of Mexico is the place to be. There's so many options. There's so many like cool cities with like 500,000 people, and you can sort of like pick the vibe or the like city dynamic that works best for you.
Yeah, I just think it's the issue with the West Coast is like the internet isn't great in a lot of places. I think it's just going to get figured out over time.
Yeah, it was pretty bad in Sayulita, but that was the only one I had issues in. Like I've been just in the past couple months, I did Vallarta, Sayulita, Mazatlan, La Paz, Cabo, San Lucas, and everywhere was good except Sayulita. I found one cafe in Sayulita that had like 60 megabyte Wi-Fi, and I was like, what the hell?
It's
And
gotten better. Sayulita has
yeah.
gotten better even from when we were here in like January last year.
Hmm.
January last year, yeah.
Yeah, I think Vallarta is going to grow like a lot. I think you've even made some videos being like, "Is this the next Nomad hotspot?" And I could definitely see that being the case.
Yeah, I definitely think it's gonna pop more, which is crazy because the rental property prices here are already pretty high. So who knows? I think yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens, but I definitely think you're gonna have more people coming here.
Hmm. And then Medellin is obviously a pretty like probably neck and neck with Playa for being like one of the top digital nomad destinations. Obviously, very different like city dynamic, but that's like one of the top. I'd say Panama City is one of the top. Bocas del Toro has a fair amount. Buenos Aires has a lot. I think for Buenos Aires, it's more like the flight kind of costs a lot of money to get down there, but once you're down there, it is cheap as hell. Like I'm talking like $2 like fancy cocktails at a rooftop bar. I'm talking like $300 a month like dope penthouse apartments and type thing. So it's super cheap, but just if you're gonna do it, you got to go for like a bit of a longer stay. You know what I mean? To make it kind of like work out. You can get like you can go to like a fancy steakhouse, get like a full steak, like beautiful bottle of wine, and your meal is like $6. Like it's unreal.
Yeah, but there's a reason why, and it's we kind of think like the reason why it's like that is because they have such bad economic instability there. So,
Hmm.
yes, you can get a lot of really great deals being there, but and maybe it's because I grew up in Eastern Europe, so I know like shit can hit the fan. There's like for me it's all like you're almost risking, everybody has a different risk tolerance. And
Yeah,
who
yeah,
knows,
you
you
got to be
could
a
be
little bit more
there.
badass
Yeah.
for
You
Argentina,
could be
but
there. You could be there when something really bad goes off. Like things like this kind of boil over very quickly. And so, everyone has a different risk profile, and I definitely want to go visit, but I don't, and this is my very uneducated opinion as well. Like I haven't done like a ton of research. It's just what I know from, scraping the top of the bucket, so to say.
yeah, it's sort of like a different risk thing in Mexico because Mexico's not without risk. I don't know. I don't want to like get into it at the very end and like scare people or whatever, but you know what I mean? It's a different type of risk. I think in Buenos Aires it's more the risk that like the ATMs just like stop working and then like you have no money and like you're kind of in like a weird spot. Kind of things like that where like sort of like the anyway, but and then Brazil, so just real quick, so I think you said you had a friend that was doing like cool stuff in Brazil, but also in like Madeira or Portugal, or what's your buddy up to in Brazil?
So Gonzalo, yeah, he did the Madeira Digital Nomad Village project, and after the success of that, he works with a lot of like governments to actually set up similar programs and like attract digital nomads. So I know he's working on something, and I can't remember exactly where in Brazil, but I know that he's working on a project there. Or maybe going to work. I don't know. I know that he did like conferences there, and he's been going there quite a bit. So, and I know that he speaks highly of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would love to connect with that guy because I love Brazil, and I definitely intend to go back as soon as I can. Random question related to that: have you been hearing about Paraguay at all?
Um, Not a ton. I mean, I have curiosities about that part of the world, but I haven't like been specifically hearing.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, it's cool. They have like a really easy residency program, and it can make sense for a lot of people from like a tax perspective, and then like a whole like Mercosur like access to Brazil perspective, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, man. So you've been really generous with your time. We just hit the 90-minute mark, so I thought we'll get to saying our outros and whatnot. Here with Mitko from the That Remote Life podcast. Yeah, tell us how people can get in touch with you. Tell us maybe a little bit about Parable, whatever you want to communicate to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say thank you so much for having me, by the way. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed our conversation. And yeah, if any of this was interesting to you, check out That Remote Life. You can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts, or thatremotelife.com as well. And then find me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active these days, having a lot of conversations there and really enjoying hanging out in the Twitter space. So I'm at Mitkoka. Mitkoka. It's just my first name and then the first two letters of my last name. So yeah, would love to connect. And if you're into business, if you enjoy nerding out about that kind of stuff and you enjoy this conversation, check out Parable. It's at joinparable.com.
Awesome. And do me a favor before we stop recording. Don't exit the browser window because it just takes a second. But yeah, Miko, man, thanks a lot. Definitely awesome to speak to a legend of the digital nomad and podcasting world like yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers.